You know, even though it's the 21st century and it's a more common occurrence now than in decades and generations past, to transition from one gender to another is often to be misunderstood. So we're going to find out what it's like to walk in the shoes of someone who's trans. Steve joins us here in the studio. Steve transitioned from a woman to a man, and his experience is different from a lot of people who've gone through that today. Welcome, first of all. Thanks for being on the program with us today.
You bet.
Okay, now let's talk about your story. You were telling me before we started to roll that you're 77 years old and that your experience transitioning from a woman to a man is different from millennials and younger people who are doing it today. Tell me how.
Well, in the first place, I grew up totally ignorant that there was any such word or definition. I thought I was the only one in the world who was miserably unhappy with my gender. Mm-hmm. And that went back to, I'd say, as soon as I was aware of the difference between girls and boys. Mm-hmm. And in the 1940s, I was born in 1940, mm-hmm. society was vastly gendered. Almost all vocations were men or women. Mm-hmm. If you were a girl, you wore dresses everywhere. Mm-hmm. Maybe picnics and hikes and camping were exceptions, but, well, and I did change into jeans when I got home from school, but as far as school, Sunday school, church, any kind of a party or event, you dressed up.
Patent leather shoes and the whole the whole thing.
And I hated it.
All right, so tell me then, at what age were you when you realized, you know, this is just not right? There's something biologically that's not right for me here.
Well, like I say, almost from the day I was aware that there was a difference between girls and boys, I looked at the boys and I said, that's the clothes I should be wearing. Those are the toys I should be playing mm-hmm. with. And you know, for people who say that gender is a social construct. Mm-hmm. If it were a social construct, I would be a perfectly happy woman right now because everything in society was telling me how to be a woman. Mm-hmm.
Now, did your parents have any idea?
No.
Did you ever feel, did you have siblings growing up?
Yes, I had siblings. I had one brother, and I was terribly jealous of him. Mm-hmm. I was the oldest of four. And
anybody in your family know? Did you ever tell anybody in your family about what was going on inside?
Not when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm. How would they have reacted in the 1940s and 50s, do you think?
I don't think they would have believed me. Mm-hmm. In 1952, Christine Jorgensen hit the headlines as the first transsexual person to be open about her transition. So it was headlines in the paper. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh my God, there's somebody else. But the public reaction was like bizarre.
What was it? What were people saying in your own household? Was the topic of Christine Jorgensen ever discussed when she was everywhere? I mean, did Dad say something or Mom make a comment one way or another?
I mean, you know, it was the headlines one day and on to the next thing.
The next day.
And mm-hmm. So for 20 years, I thought Christine and I were the only two. And the biggest coincidence of my life is that about 1971, I was working for some medical researchers, and they told me I could read their journals in my spare time as a way of being more helpful to them. And one of their journals had an article on transsexuality. I was in my early 30s. It was the first that I knew there was a word for me. Mm-hmm. It was the first that I knew that I could get surgery. They were doing the surgery in Stanford. I was living in San Francisco, 40 minutes away. Mm-hmm. And because I was working for these medical researchers, I had a library card at the UC San Francisco Med Center. So I went to the library and took out all 3 books on transsexuality. read the first chapter of the first book, and I freaked.
Why?
I couldn't imagine telling anyone. I couldn't imagine that I would have any friends or family left if I went and got the surgery.
And got the surgery.
Transitioned.
So what was the turning point? What was the aha moment that made you decide, you know what, I have to do this?
April 2001, the City and County of San Francisco granted health benefits, full health benefits, to their transsexual workers and retirees. And it wasn't alone that I was a retiree of the City and County of San Francisco, because if I had to, I'd have done it out of my own pocket. It was that it was in the newspaper, television, magazines as this positive thing that had happened.
Societal perception had shifted.
And I had been telling close friends, though not family, for probably the past 10 years. And I have to say, the first friend that I told said, "Oh my God, I can't imagine anything more painful." And I was, my first reaction was, "Oh, I'm used to it." And then I went home and thought about it, and I'm not used to this. I'm not used to it at all. So, I mean...
So you say you had difficulty in terms of you wouldn't have talked to your family about this. Tell me about relationships. Were you involved in relationships up to that point? Romantic or intimate relationships?
No.
No, you were by yourself?
I was by myself. And I mean, who knows? I never decided not to get married, and I never decided to get married, and was never particularly interested in dating.
So was it a lonely existence? I mean, from the time you're growing up and you are feeling that you're a different gender than what you were born with. You can't tell your siblings. You can't tell your parents. You can't tell your close friends. It's just, you can't talk about it in society because how society would look at you. What was it? A lonely existence?
Not alone for that. I mean, I had a hell of a lot of emotional problems growing up. And if you think, well, that's related to being trans, my whole family. There was a generational history of severe depression in my family.
So it was compounded by your struggle?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so you go ahead and you have the surgery. All right, so tell me what happens after the surgery. Tell me about you're retired, so you can go back to work, but tell me about going back and resuming your life after.
Okay, let's start from when I decided.
Okay, let's start there then.
Because while I didn't have to tell anybody at work because I was retired, although I still was in contact with some of my colleagues and would go visit them from time to time. So the word got out, and people at work were very accepting. At least those who talked to me. But also, I mean, we had openly gay people working in my department, and so it tended to be a pretty liberal place to work anyway. And my experience is vastly different than if I had been in some other parts of the country.
Certainly.
So the first people I told were my neighbors, because I figured I can't hide. And the woman across the street, we had had a discussion about 10 years earlier in which I had said homosexuality is not a sin, and she had said, "It is too, it's in the Bible." And in a way I knew not to argue with her. So I went over and I told her, and she said, "Look, you've been our neighbor for, I think it had been more than 20 years. And you've always been there for us. You've helped us out. That's what matters to me." And that's the magic of changing your opinion because you know somebody now. There was an elderly couple on the corner, and I thought, oh boy, what are they going to think? when I told them, they said, "That's wonderful. We saw that on Geraldo." So, I mean, and then the people next door, I particularly worried about teenage boys. Were they going to think I was crashing the clubhouse? So I had been over at my neighbor's house, and he had a teenage son, and his teenage son came in and greeted me like this. You don't shake hands with a woman like that. And that said to me, yeah, it's cool.
It's fine. All right, so you go through, you have the surgery, and then you come home. So tell me about after. Tell me about your family after.
No, I'll tell you about my family first.
Okay.
Because, you know, all of this stuff started before I had any surgery. So my mom had died. My family was close. We got together a lot. Well, no. By that time, my sister and my brother had taken off and had simply left the family. And so there was a time when it was my dad, my sister Beth, my two nephews, and myself. And I said to Dad, well, what do you think of this thing that the city's done? And he said, oh, those poor people, it must be so hard on them. So I said, well, Dad, I'm one. I could have walked across the room and punched him in the stomach for the reaction he had. I mean, it was hard on him. And I realized from being a part of trans support groups now that parents do tend to take it hard at
Right.
first.
Tell me about the reaction. You see, you could have punched him in the stomach. What was the reaction?
He just had a hard time with it.
Did he get angry? Did he get sad? Did he yell? Was he sullen? What
was
did he
just
do?
clearly blown away.
He had no clue.
No clue. And yet, my dad was a woodworker who did his work in his shop in the basement of our home. And he was not one of those parents who said, stay out of my workshop. I could come into a shop anytime, and I did. I was much closer to my dad than my mother. And he'd roll out his blueprints and show me what he was doing, and he taught me to use all the tools in his shop, and yet he was blown away. What his final statement was, I want you to be happy. If this is what makes you happy, that's what I want. My nephew said, you'll always be my aunt. 6 months later, he gives me a birthday card, and it says, this card is good for a movie and dinner, an Unc-Neff event.
Oh, that's cool.
And he said what brought him around was he saw how happy I was. My other nephew didn't say anything right away, but he had this cute smile on his face. And he told me later that he'd always known there was something. And he knew I wasn't lesbian, but he couldn't
put his finger on it. Now, in the interest of time, I want to end with this. If there is one thing that you would like people to know that people don't understand about those who have transitioned, and maybe the biggest misconception, or maybe something you want people to know who they don't know anyone who's transitioned, or at least they don't think they know anyone who's transitioned,
Right.
and you really think might help them. What's the one thing that you would say?
You know, this isn't something that you wake up someday and think, oh yeah, it'd be cool to be. And especially going from female to male, I suppose people could suppose I did it for male privilege. But if you consider more people transition from male to female, you know that can't be the reason. I grew up wondering what in the world makes me so darn sure I feel like a man when obviously I'm a woman. I don't have an answer to that, but all I can say is it is a source of extreme discomfort and unhappiness.
Thank you for letting us spend a few minutes walking in your shoes.
Sure, you're welcome.